The cinematic landscape of the California coast was bathed in the golden, dying light of a late afternoon sun, casting long, jagged shadows against the weathered exterior of the film set. It was a place where illusions were manufactured, where the boundaries between reality and fiction blurred into a singular, haunting tableau. The project was titled Image of Evil, a production that had become, in the eyes of many, a cursed endeavor. At the center of this maelstrom stood the legendary investigator Barnaby Jones, a man whose presence was as steady and immovable as the ancient cliffs that overlooked the Pacific Ocean. The episode began with the familiar, rhythmic cadence of the show, the haunting melody that signaled the arrival of mystery and intrigue. The air was thick with the scent of brine and the lingering, acrid smell of burnt timber from a recent fire. Buddy Ebsen, embodying the calm, calculating brilliance of Barnaby Jones, stood near the charred remains of the paint shed, his eyes scanning the horizon. Beside him, the production crew moved with a jittery, nervous energy, their faces etched with the fatigue of a 2-week delay that threatened to bankrupt the entire venture. It was not merely the financial ruin that haunted the production, it was the shadow of death. Mr. Chambers, the leading man, had met his end in a bizarre and tragic accident involving a lift gate and a late-night fire. Yet, to a man of Barnaby Jones's experience, the term accident was merely a convenient label for something far more calculated. He had been hired by the California Meridian Insurance Company, not to simply observe, but to dismantle the facade that Darren Anderson, the ambitious and self-proclaimed auteur, had meticulously constructed. Darren Anderson moved through the set like a man possessed, his voice a sharp, biting instrument that cut through the silence of the dying light. He was a man who demanded perfection, a man who saw his cast and crew as extensions of his own creative ego. Beside him, his loyal, albeit increasingly weary, assistant Phyllis Schaefer moved with a silent, haunting devotion. She was the one who smoothed the ruffled feathers, who ensured the gears of production continued to turn even as the machine itself began to fracture under the weight of mounting pressure and secrets. As the day waned, the tension reached a boiling point. The arrival of an investigative mind had rattled the composure of those who had much to lose. Carl Mitchell, the stunt double who had stepped into the limelight, was a man desperate for his moment of glory. He had been the one to discover the body of Mr. Chambers, a detail that Barnaby found particularly noteworthy. There was a story in the way Carl handled the aftermath, a story that felt rehearsed, polished for an audience that had yet to arrive. Barnaby sat in his humble car, the interior sparse and practical, a stark contrast to the opulence of the world of cinema. Beside him, his daughter-in-law, Betty, offered a sympathetic ear, her own intellect sharpened by the constant influx of gossip and news. They were an unlikely pair of investigators, yet their synergy was undeniable. Barnaby turned over a charred, unlocked padlock in his hand, a piece of metal that whispered tales of betrayal. It had been found near the paint shed, a silent witness to a crime that had been staged to look like a mere mishap. The investigation led Barnaby into the heart of the production, a place where egos clashed and ambitions were nurtured in the dark. He spoke with Bob Tarcher, the first assistant, a man whose loyalty to the project seemed anchored in something more than just a paycheck. He questioned the nature of the fire, the timing of the explosion, and the peculiar silence of those who had been present at the Regency and on the night in question. Each conversation was a thread, and Barnaby was gathering them, weaving them into a tapestry of truth that Darren Anderson could no longer escape. The atmosphere at the castle, which served as the Gothic backdrop for the film, was oppressive. It was there that Barnaby finally cornered the producer. Darren, ever the director, tried to command the narrative, attempting to dismiss the investigation as a minor inconvenience, a distraction from his artistic pursuit. He spoke of the auteur, of the necessity of control, of the burden of genius. But Barnaby was unmoved. He had seen the way Darren looked at the wreckage of his own ambition, the way he clutched at the fragments of his career as if they were his own soul. The investigation deepened with the appearance of Iris Harmon, a gossip columnist whose influence stretched across the industry. She was a woman who traded in secrets, who knew the value of a whispered rumor and the power of a public revelation. To Iris, the chaos on the set of Image of Evil was a delicious, sordid tale, a narrative that she intended to spin for her audience. Barnaby, recognizing the utility of her connections, allowed her to play her part, knowing that the truth often revealed itself in the most unexpected ways. As the night deepened, the secrets began to unravel. Carl Mitchell, caught in the web of his own machinations, had sought to blackmail his way to stardom, believing that he held the keys to the kingdom. He had played a dangerous game, one that required the audacity of an actor and the cold precision of a predator. He had confronted Darren, demanding the lead role, threatening to reveal the truth about the night of the fire. But he had underestimated the man he was dealing with. Darren, driven to the edge of madness, had not merely been a victim of circumstance, he had been the architect of his own dark reality. The final act of this unfolding tragedy took place in the desolate quiet of the set, under the watchful gaze of the moon. Barnaby stood in the shadows, his presence a silent judgment. Phyllis Schaefer, long the quiet observer, found herself drawn into the center of the storm. The mask of professionalism she wore had begun to crack, revealing the deep, unrequited love she harbored for a man who could not see her, a man who viewed the world only through the lens of his own success. Darren, cornered and desperate, attempted one last performance. He tried to turn the narrative, to create a scene where he was the martyr, where the violence was merely a consequence of forces beyond his control. But the script had failed him. Barnaby stepped forward, his voice a steady, calm reminder of the consequences of one's actions. He spoke of the knots tied by a sailor, the inconsistencies in the testimony, the impossibility of the fire being anything other than an act of cold, calculated malice. In the end, the truth did not explode with the force of the fire that had taken Mr. Chambers. It settled like the dust after a long, exhausting day of work. The pretenses of Hollywood, the allure of the star, the vanity of the director, all were stripped away, leaving only the raw, human fragility of those involved. Darren, faced with the ruin of everything he had built, found no applause, no final cut, no grand finale. He found only the cold reality of his own choices. As the authorities arrived, the scene transformed from a film set into a reality that no director could edit. The lights, once used to create the illusion of mystery, now illuminated the truth for all to see. Barnaby walked away from the scene, his task complete, his commitment to the truth satisfied. He was a man who moved through the world with a quiet dignity, a man who understood that even in a place built on make-believe, the truth remained the only thing that could stand the test of time. The story of the set of Image of Evil became a whisper in the annals of history, a cautionary tale for those who would trade their integrity for the spotlight. It was a story of ambition that had lost its way, of love that had curdled into obsession, and of a man who saw through the illusions to the heart of the matter. In the quiet aftermath, as the stars twinkled above the silent cliffs, the memory of what had transpired remained as a testament to the fact that, regardless of how grand the stage, the reality of one's actions can never be ignored. Barnaby Jones, with his unassuming manner and his unwavering focus, had once again reminded the world that justice, while often complex, is always worth the pursuit. And in the silence that followed, there was a peace that the production had long sought, a peace that only the truth could provide. The following morning, the sun rose over the Pacific with the same indifference it always showed to the affairs of humanity. For the crew, the work would eventually continue, or it would not. The film might find its way to the screens, or it might be relegated to the archives of forgotten projects. But for those who had been part of the saga, nothing would ever be the same. They had stared into the heart of an abyss, and they had seen the reflection of their own desires and fears. Barnaby, back in the quiet comfort of his own life, reflected on the nature of the people he had encountered. They were, in their own way, searching for something meaningful, even if they had gone about finding it in the most destructive of ways. It was a lesson in the complexity of the human spirit, a reminder that every life is a story, and every story carries the weight of its own morality. As he prepared to move on to the next challenge, the memory of the case remained a quiet, instructive echo. He thought of Iris, of her insatiable curiosity, and wondered what other stories she would uncover in the landscape of Hollywood. He thought of Phyllis, and the tragedy of a love that was defined by the absence of return. And he thought of Darren, a man who had everything, yet possessed so little. It was not a tale of victory, for there was no joy in the downfall of others, but it was a resolution that brought a necessary clarity to a world that thrived on obscurity. The investigation had been a journey, a path through the dark woods of human fallibility, and Barnaby had emerged on the other side with the only thing that mattered, the certainty of the facts. In a profession built on the art of deduction, he had once again shown that the most effective tool in any investigation is the integrity of the mind, a steady hand, and an unwavering commitment to the truth, regardless of where it might lead. The episode was over. The cameras had stopped rolling, but the story, in its own silent, lingering way, continued to resonate.